Hey guys, today I'm going to take you through the process of assembling a U-split, an accessory for DIY electric skateboards that I sell on my website. Though I'm using this as an example, the steps here are generic and can be used to assemble any PCB. The first thing you'll want to do is apply solder paste. There are many different methods to apply solder paste, but the one I prefer is to use a stainless steel stencil and squeegee. Using a stencil like this, you're able to quickly apply solder paste to all of the pads on the PCB at once. When using solder paste for the first time in a while, I always make sure to mix it up so that all of the flux and solder balls are combined. To aid in the application process, I've designed these stencil frames that hold the PCB captive while applying solder paste and keep the stencil aligned for repeated use. The stencil frame also acts as a storage aid so that the stencil can be placed back in the rack that it came from for later use. Once all of the boards have been done, then the stencil frame and all other solder paste tools can be placed to the side and we're ready for component placement. For this project, I've organized all of the components into two part organizer bins. With labels on each of the compartments, it makes it easy to locate the components when it comes time to place them. This is by far the most tedious part of the process, since some of the components I have to deal with are not much larger than a speck of dust. It's most satisfying when I get to the large components where there's a major before and after difference to be seen when placing them. Once all of the components have been placed, then it's time to move the boards over to the hot plate. The temperature of the hot plate is set to 225 Celsius and the boards are placed on towards the end of the ramp-up cycle. This allows them to reach the initial temperature very quickly while ramping up to the final temperature fairly slowly. As the boards sit, you can see the solder flowing onto the pads and pins of the components. Once all of the solder has finished flowing, then the boards are ready to be removed from the hot plate and the next set of boards placed on. This time around, you can see the solder flowing more clearly. It works its way from the top down, going from the first board placed to the last. Sometimes the solder doesn't flow properly onto all of the components, like the connector shown here. In this particular case, The solder pulled the connector to the left side, misaligning it with the board edge. With some gentle nudges, the component can usually be placed back to where it should be. Now that the first side is fully populated and soldered, we can now apply solder paste to the second side. Once all of the solder paste is applied, we can place all of the components on the second side as well. One good tip when placing components on a PCB is to always go from the smallest component to the largest. That way, you don't risk knocking any of the larger components off their pads when placing the smaller components around them. Now that all the second side components are placed, it's time to reflow the solder. Since this time around I have components on the underside of the board, I'm not able to use the hot plate like I did at first. Instead, I'll use a reflow oven. This is a lot like a toaster oven, but instead has sensors inside that allow it to follow an exact temperature profile. Though there's a lot more room in the tray for more boards, I found placing 5 at a time yields the most consistent results for this project. It's always better to spend a little extra time ensuring the boards are done correctly rather than wasting time fixing boards that didn't solder properly. Here's a view of what goes on inside the oven during one full reflow cycle. Once the cycle is over, the boards can be removed and new boards can be placed. After each board is finished reflowing, then I inspect it for solder issues like solder shorts or unsoldered pins, and if everything looks good, the process is complete.